When I walked into the charity gala, laughter followed me before I even reached my table. It wasn't loud, and it wasn't kind. It was the kind of laughter that hides behind napkins and wine glasses, the kind that travels just far enough to sting. I stopped for a moment at the entrance, pretending to look for someone even though I already knew where every familiar face sat. I just needed a second to breathe. The ballroom glittered, crystal chandeliers, polished floors, and the sound of false compliments echoing from every corner. And then I saw her, Vanessa Price, the town's new social jewel. 35, polished, perfect, and powerful. At least, that's what she wanted everyone to believe. Her gown shimmered gold, her jewelry blinding under the lights. She leaned close to another woman and whispered something behind her manicured hand. I didn't need to hear the words. Her laughter told me enough. I adjusted the sleeve of my dress and walked in, my heels soft against the marble floor. The blue gown I wore wasn't from any designer. It was something I had made myself, a simple satin piece stitched slowly over quiet evenings in my living room. It wasn't perfect, but it was honest. Every seam carried a memory. Every thread is a story. It was the same dress I had worn to Robert's retirement dinner 10 years ago, the last event we ever attended together before he passed. He used to call me his sapphire because he said I glowed the same way the ocean did in morning light. That memory had been enough reason to wear it again. But standing under those chandeliers, surrounded by women half my age with diamonds on their fingers and glass hearts in their chests, I realized sentiment didn't count for much in their world. Is that homemade? Someone murmured. Vanessa turned toward the voice, feigning surprise, as if she hadn't planned it all along. Oh, I think it's lovely, she said, loud enough for others to hear. It's refreshing when someone doesn't care about appearances. The laughter that followed wasn't cruel in tone, but cruel in meaning. I smiled softly and kept walking. Because when you've lived long enough, you learn that sometimes the only power left is pretending you didn't hear. My son, Ethan, was at the stage, talking to one of the donors. He looked handsome in his black suit, nervous in that quiet way he always was. When his eyes met mine, I saw the hesitation there. The same hesitation I'd seen so many times before, the one that said, "Please, Mom, don't make a scene. Don't embarrass me." I gave him a gentle nod, the kind that meant, I won't. I found my seat near the back. The tablecloth smelled faintly of perfume and polish. 2 women I barely knew smiled at me politely before turning back to their conversation about handbags and holidays. I didn't mind. I was used to it. A waiter poured champagne into my glass. "Beautiful dress, ma'am," he said quietly. His kindness almost broke me. I thanked him and looked around the room. Everyone shimmered, jewels, sequins, silk. But under all that shine, there was a strange emptiness, a kind of hunger that no amount of luxury could feed. The mayor took the stage, his voice booming as he thanked the crowd for their generosity. My son clapped. Vanessa clapped the loudest. Every year, the same event, wealthy people donating money they'd never miss, pretending it made them saints. Robert used to call it a charity theater, but I came anyway every year, not for the people, for the cause, for the Children's Scholarship Fund. Robert had believed in it deeply, and so did I. When the speeches ended, the guests began drifting toward the buffet. The laughter grew louder, looser. I stayed seated, my glass untouched. That's when Vanessa approached. "Mrs. Hale," she said sweetly, placing a hand on my shoulder. "It's so nice to see you here again. You must tell me where you found that gown. It's so authentic." There was that pause, the kind where an insult hides behind a compliment. I looked up at her. "I made it myself," I said simply. Her eyebrows lifted, pretending to be impressed. "Oh, how wonderful. I wish I had the time for that sort of thing." "I'm sure you do," I replied gently. Her smile wavered for half a second. "I do hope you enjoy tonight's auction," she added, turning to glance at Ethan. "We've all contributed something special. It's so important for everyone to give what they can, don't you think?" "I couldn't agree more," I said, and she walked away, her perfume lingering long after her kindness had vanished. I watched her glide through the crowd like she owned the air around her. People laughed a little too loudly when she spoke, nodded a little too quickly. The kind of power she had was fragile. It only lasted as long as others pretended it was real. and still, for a moment, I felt the sting of her words. I thought of Robert again, how he used to tell me that class wasn't about how people treated you when you were rich, but how you behaved when you were not. So, I lifted my glass and smiled to myself. The night carried on. The music played softly. The auctioneer took his place at the podium, tapping the microphone to quiet the room. "Ladies and gentlemen, if we could all take our seats," he said. "We'll begin tonight's charity auction." I saw Vanessa move to the front, her confidence glowing under the lights. Ethan joined the other executives. I sat in the back, unnoticed. Mr. Langford, the auctioneer, began announcing the first few items: art pieces, diamond necklaces, luxury trips. Applause followed each sale. Then came a small pause. He smiled, reading from a card. "And now," he said, "we come to tonight's most significant donation." A hush fell. People turned in their chairs. He adjusted his glasses, scanning the paper. "This next contribution," he continued, "comes from the heart. From someone who has quietly supported this foundation for many years without asking for recognition." Vanessa leaned toward her table mates. "That must be the Price family contribution," she whispered loudly. The crowd murmured in agreement, but Mr. Langford kept reading. "This year, she has chosen to reveal her name for the first time. Please join me in thanking Mrs. Margaret Hale." The sound of my name rippled through the hall like wind through glass. For a heartbeat, I thought I'd misheard. Every face turned toward me. Ethan froze. Vanessa's smile slipped like paint cracking on a wall. Mr. Langford continued, "Mrs. Hale has established a scholarship fund in memory of her late husband, Robert Hale, totaling $1 million. Gasps filled the room. Hands that had just been clapping for jewels now trembled against wine glasses. I stood slowly. My knees felt weak, but my heart was steady. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. I simply smiled and nodded, my blue gown shimmering softly under the lights that once mocked it. And as I looked around that glittering room, at the faces that had laughed at me, pitied me, ignored me, I realized something. They hadn't mocked a dress. They had mocked humility, and humility was about to humble them all. I didn't know then that the same dress they laughed at would soon make them kneel in silence. The sound of applause still echoed when I sat down. People stared for a few seconds longer, pretending to smile, pretending they had always known. Then, one by one, they turned away, back to their small talk, their glasses of wine, their masks. The gala lights shimmered across the room, bouncing off chandeliers and sequined gowns. Everything glittered, but nothing felt real. I looked around and saw the same people who had laughed at me only an hour ago now, whispering my name with new respect. They didn't see me any differently. They just saw money now. Vanessa, of course, was the best actress in the room. She clapped slowly, elegantly, and forced a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "How wonderful," she said to no one in particular. "Who would have thought?" Her words floated through the air, light as perfume and twice as fake. I watched her take a sip of champagne, pretending not to care, but the way her hand trembled gave her away. The golden woman who once ruled this crowd suddenly looked uneasy in her own spotlight. Mr. Langford continued his announcements, thanking sponsors, calling for bids. Each time someone raised a hand to donate, Vanessa clapped louder, as if to remind everyone she was still the queen of this stage. I stayed silent, letting the noise fade around me. I had no interest in the applause. I wasn't here for recognition. I had done this because Robert would have wanted it. He always believed that kindness meant the most when no one was watching. But tonight, the masks were slipping. I saw Ethan in the corner, shifting nervously. He hadn't expected this. Maybe he was proud, maybe confused. I couldn't tell. But I knew one thing. He was seeing me differently for the first time in years. People who once looked through me now smiled too wide, too quickly. "Mrs. Hale," one woman said, brushing my arm, "we simply must talk later." "You're such an inspiration." I nodded politely, though her tone made it sound more like a strategy than a compliment. For them, this was all performance. The gala, the giving, the gestures, it was theater. And everyone was just trying to get a good seat. And there, in the middle of the glitter and the gossip, I realized how alone real kindness can feel in a room full of masks. The auctioneer cleared his throat again, tapping the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice sharp now, "our next announcement is a special one." The room quieted instantly. Even Vanessa straightened in her seat, her smile back in place. I turned my attention to the stage, heart steady, hands calm, because something told me that the night's real performance hadn't even begun yet. The auctioneer adjusted the microphone, his smile polite but tight. "Tonight," he said, "we have a surprise announcement that changes everything for our charity program." The crowd leaned forward. Forks paused midair. The music quieted until only the sound of crystal glasses clinking softly could be heard. I didn't move. I knew what was coming, but they didn't. Mr. Langford held up a single gold envelope. "Mrs. Hale's donation," he said slowly, "will not only fund scholarships, it will also establish a permanent education center for underprivileged children, right here in the city. Construction begins next month." The words landed like a stone in still water. Ripples of shock spread through the crowd. He continued, "The center will be named the Robert Hale Foundation, in honor of her late husband's lifelong belief that education is the truest form of charity." For a moment, the entire ballroom fell silent. Then came the applause, but it wasn't the shallow kind this time. It was hesitant, then real, a sound that grew from surprise into something that almost resembled respect. I didn't stand. I didn't wave. I just smiled faintly and looked down at my lap. My hands were steady, my heart calm. Across the room, Vanessa's eyes met mine. Her face was unreadable, somewhere between anger and disbelief. She had always been the face of every donation, every event, every photo. But now, for once, someone else's name filled the air, and it wasn't hers. I could see her calculating, even now, how to turn this into her moment. She leaned toward her husband, whispering, her eyes darting from me to the stage. Ethan, meanwhile, was frozen in his seat. When he finally stood and clapped, there was something different in his expression. Not embarrassment this time, but something softer. Maybe pride, maybe guilt. The applause faded, replaced by murmurs. People began to whisper my name again, but in a different tone now. Less mockery, more curiosity. I could almost hear their thoughts. How did we miss it? She never said a word. Was she always this generous? But what none of them knew was that this had been planned for years. Robert and I had saved quietly, slowly. While they built their mansions, we built a future for children we'd never meet. I came to this gala tonight only because I wanted to see it happen, to watch the world that once laughed at me discover who I really was. And as I looked around, I saw it in their faces, the shift, the discomfort, the realization that wealth doesn't always wear gold. Vanessa lifted her glass again, her lips curving into a faint smile. "Well," she said softly, "isn't that touching?" But her voice trembled, and deep down, I knew this night wasn't over. Something told me Vanessa Price wasn't the kind of woman who could let another person shine without a fight. The applause faded into background noise, replaced by the soft hum of whispers. Everywhere I turned, eyes followed me. Curious eyes, envious eyes. But the loudest silence in that room came from Vanessa Price. She sat perfectly still, her gold bracelet catching the light as she swirled her champagne. Her smile was fixed, but her jaw was tight. She looked like someone who'd bitten into something sweet and found it sour. When the mayor came to shake my hand, she was the first to stand, clapping, smiling, pretending to be proud. "Oh, Margaret," she said in her honey-smooth voice, "you kept such a secret. You've really surprised us all." Her tone said friendship, but her eyes said threat. "I like surprises," I replied softly. "They reveal what people really think." Her smile faltered for half a second. Then she leaned closer, close enough that only I could hear. "Well, enjoy your moment," she whispered. "You'll need it, because I have one of my own." Before I could respond, she turned away, her heels clicking against the marble as she walked toward the bar. My heart beat slowly, not fast. Not from fear, just the quiet alertness that comes when you sense a storm forming behind a smile. Ethan appeared beside me a few minutes later. "Mom," he said quietly, "that was incredible. I didn't know about the foundation." "It wasn't about knowing," I told him. "It was about doing." He nodded, looking down, his voice small. "Dad would have been proud. He would have wanted you here, I said. He didn't answer. Just gave a faint smile before walking off to take a call. His phone was always ringing these days. Business, clients, deals. I sometimes wondered if he even knew what real silence sounded like anymore. I watched him go, then looked across the room. Vanessa was standing with two men, her voice low, her smile wider now. She was showing them something on her phone. One of them turned to look at me and laughed. It was a small laugh. But I recognized it. The same one that had followed me when I walked in wearing this dress. Whatever she was saying wasn't kind. The lights dimmed again as the auction moved toward its closing bids. But I could feel her eyes on me, sharp, searching, measuring. I had seen that look before, in business meetings, in boardrooms, even in mirrors. It was the look of someone who couldn't stand losing control. And I realized something then. This wasn't just about a gala anymore. Vanessa Price didn't want my respect. She wanted my silence, and soon I'd learn exactly why. The auction was winding down. People were half listening now, more focused on their drinks than the stage. The laughter returned, lighter this time, the kind that comes when people believe the night belongs to them again. But then the lights flickered. Once. Twice. The screen behind the stage glowed white, bright enough to pull everyone's eyes toward it. At first, I thought it was just another slideshow, photos of smiling donors and ribbon cuttings. But then I heard Vanessa's voice, smooth and confident, cut through the microphone. "Before we end tonight's event," she said, "I'd like to share something special. A small tribute, really. To generosity, to authenticity." The room quieted. The air felt strange, too still. On the screen, a photograph appeared. It was me, standing in my small kitchen, hair tied back, hands covered in flour. I remembered that day. Ethan had taken the picture years ago when I was baking Robert's favorite pie. It wasn't meant for anyone but us. Laughter rippled through the crowd. Vanessa smiled sweetly. "Mrs. Hale here," she continued, "is truly a woman of tradition. Can you believe she still stitches her own clothes and bakes everything from scratch? A rare thing these days." Her tone was polite, but her eyes sparkled with mischief. She wasn't celebrating me. She was exposing me. The next image appeared, my house. Small, modest, with peeling paint and an old mailbox. Someone had taken that photo recently, without my permission. "This," Vanessa said, turning toward the audience, "is where tonight's biggest donor lives. Proof that true charity doesn't need luxury, only a generous heart." The laughter grew louder this time. The kind people hide behind clinking glasses and fake sympathy. My chest felt tight, but I kept my face calm. The calm you learn after years of surviving quiet humiliations. I glanced at Ethan. His face was pale. He hadn't expected this either. Vanessa turned back to the crowd. "We should all learn from her, shouldn't we?" she said, her smile stretching wider. "To give, even when there's so little left to give." A few polite chuckles. A few pitying looks. It was clever, her attack hidden inside a compliment. She'd managed to make me the night's lesson. But what she didn't know was that this wasn't the only surprise waiting tonight. I rose slowly, my chair scraping softly against the marble. Every head turned. Vanessa's smile faltered, just a little. I walked toward the stage, each step quiet, steady. My blue gown shimmered under the lights, the same gown she'd laughed at when I arrived. "Thank you," I said into the microphone. My voice didn't shake. "You're right, Vanessa. I do live simply. I bake, I sew, and I give. But there's one more thing you forgot to mention." The crowd hushed. I looked at the screen behind me, then back at her. I also remember. Vanessa blinked, confused, and she didn't know it yet. But that single sentence would soon unravel everything she'd tried to hide. The microphone was warm in my hand. Vanessa's painted smile didn't move, but her eyes flickered, just once. A small crack in the gold mask she always wore. "I also remember," I repeated softly, turning toward the audience. "Every call for help, every promise made, every debt that was never repaid." A murmur ran through the crowd. The kind of sound that means people don't know whether to clap or to hold their breath. Vanessa laughed lightly, though her voice trembled. "Oh, Margaret," she said, "please, this isn't the time." "It's exactly the time," I interrupted gently. You see, while I was sewing this vintage dress you all seem to find amusing, I was also signing checks. Not for myself. Not for new shoes or fancy vacations. But for the people in this room? Someone gasped. Vanessa took a step forward, still smiling, but her color drained. Now, Margaret, let's not make this uncomfortable. Uncomfortable? I tilted my head. That's what you called it when your husband asked me for a small loan to cover your business taxes last year. Do you remember how small that loan was, Vanessa? $100,000? The room froze. Her husband shifted in his seat, looking like he'd just swallowed ice. And when you couldn't pay it back, I continued, my tone calm and steady. I told you to donate double that amount to the Children's Fund instead. But you didn't. You used it to buy that necklace you're wearing right now. The crowd went silent. The air thickened. Vanessa's lips parted, but no sound came out. Her smile was gone now, completely gone. I turned slightly toward the audience, keeping my voice even. I never wanted to say that out loud. I believed in grace, in giving quietly, but since my home and my life have become part of the evening's entertainment, I think it's only fair the full story is told. You could have heard a pin drop. I looked directly at Vanessa again. You called my life small. You mocked my home, but everything I own was built with honesty. Can you say the same? Her eyes glistened, not from remorse, but rage. I don't know what you think you're implying. I'm not implying, I said. I'm reminding. Her husband suddenly stood up. This is outrageous. Sit down, Peter, I said quietly. He did. All around us, the whispers turned sharp, hungry. People weren't laughing anymore. They were watching. And for the first time since I'd entered that ballroom, Vanessa Price didn't look untouchable. She looked terrified. I handed the microphone back to the auctioneer and stepped away. My pulse steady, my steps slow. Vanessa stayed frozen, her golden gown catching the light like a warning flare. Her smile had finally cracked. And through it, the truth was starting to show. You could almost hear the silence breathing. Every face in the ballroom was fixed on Vanessa now. The laughter that had filled the night was gone, replaced by the kind of hush that only comes when people realize they've chosen the wrong side. Vanessa tried to keep her poise. She straightened her back, lifted her chin, and forced out a laugh that sounded too high, too thin. Well, she said, waving a trembling hand, this has certainly taken a dramatic turn. Margaret, dear, perhaps we should— Her voice faltered when she saw no one was laughing with her. A woman from the front table whispered something to her husband. He frowned. Another guest leaned toward his friend, covering his mouth as he spoke. All eyes darted between me and Vanessa like they were watching the start of a storm. The auctioneer, poor man, looked like he wanted to disappear behind the podium. Ladies and gentlemen, he began awkwardly, perhaps we should take a short break. No, I said quietly. Let's finish. I wasn't angry. Just done. Done with pretending. Done with the masks. Vanessa forced a smile. This is absurd, she said, her voice rising. You can't just accuse people in public like this. I haven't accused anyone, I replied. I've simply reminded you of a promise. Gasps, murmurs. The word promise hung in the air like smoke. Peter shifted in his chair, his face red. Vanessa, he hissed under his breath, is this true? She didn't answer. That silence said more than words ever could. Someone from the next table, a man who had once laughed at my dress, spoke up. Is that the same necklace you bought last summer? The one from the price auction in New York? Vanessa's eyes snapped toward him. That's none of your business. But it was too late. The room was turning. People whispered, their voices growing bolder. The sparkle of champagne no longer matched the tension hanging in the air. I watched as admiration turned to judgment. How fast society could change sides when the truth started to show. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost because I knew what it was like to be mocked in this same room, surrounded by polite smiles that hid cruelty. But the difference was I had stood there with honesty. She was standing in lies. Ethan moved closer to me, his face unreadable. Mom, he whispered, maybe we should go. In a minute, I said softly. Vanessa tried to laugh again, but her voice broke. You think you've won something, Margaret? She snapped. You think money makes you noble? I met her eyes. No, I said. Integrity does. And just like that, It was over. She turned away from me, her hands trembling as she reached for her glass. But her reflection in the crystal stem told another story, one of fear, not pride. The same people who once cheered her now avoided her gaze. And for the first time all night, I didn't feel small. I felt seen. Vanessa stood frozen, her hand clutching the stem of her champagne glass like it was the only thing keeping her upright. The gold sequins on her gown no longer shimmered. They just reflected the harsh light that had turned on her. The crowd waited. Some curious, some hungry, some afraid. I took a breath and stepped closer to the microphone again. I hadn't planned to speak twice that night, but sometimes life doesn't follow rehearsed scripts. Sometimes the truth demands a stage of its own. I wasn't going to say anything more, I began, my voice steady, but since we're all speaking so openly tonight, there's something you all deserve to know. The air thickened. Even the waiters had stopped moving. I looked around the room, at the faces that had laughed, whispered, judged. Then my eyes landed back on Vanessa. Last year, I said quietly, I gave my late husband's company shares to the foundation. Every cent was meant for the children. But someone tried to buy those shares through a private broker using a false name. The murmurs started instantly. I paused just long enough to let the tension build. That false name, I continued, was registered to an address that doesn't exist, except on paper. And yet, that same address was listed as a business office for Price & Co. Vanessa's face went white. Don't, she whispered. You don't know what you're saying. I know exactly what I'm saying, I replied calmly. The person who tried to reroute the donation funds wasn't some stranger. It was you, Vanessa. The room exploded in noise, gasps, voices, the scraping of chairs. Vanessa's husband stood abruptly. That's a lie, he shouted. You can't prove that. I looked at him evenly. Actually, I can. From my clutch, I pulled a folded paper, one that had waited months for this moment. The broker confessed everything when he learned where the money was really meant to go. He handed over every transaction record to the foundation board. I turned to the auctioneer, who was staring in shock. The documents were verified 2 weeks ago. The board decided to let me announce the donation tonight because justice, like generosity, deserves witnesses. Vanessa's mouth opened. But no sound came out. The silence that followed was unlike any I'd ever heard. It wasn't quiet. It was heavy, thick with truth. I could see realization ripple through the crowd. The same people who once envied Vanessa were now pulling back from her as if she were made of fire. I didn't come here to humiliate anyone, I said softly. I came to honor my husband's dream. But some people can't stand to see goodness unless they can profit from it. My voice stayed calm, even as my hands trembled. And that's the real tragedy tonight. Not the dress they mocked. Not the laughter, but the greed that hides behind charity. I stepped back, handing the papers to Mr. Langford. His eyes widened as he scanned the first line, and when he looked up, the entire room knew Vanessa's kingdom had fallen. The ballroom erupted into whispers. 1,000 small voices tangled into one low roar. The sound was sharp and uneven, like glass cracking under pressure. Vanessa didn't move. She stood there, every muscle in her body tense, her painted smile gone. The gold of her gown seemed dull now, like the shine had been stolen from it. Peter reached for her arm. Say something, he hissed, but she didn't. Her lips trembled, eyes darting across the crowd. These were the same people who once begged for her attention, the ones who used to laugh too hard at her jokes, praise her fashion, and copy her tone. Now they wouldn't even meet her gaze. It was like watching a candle go out in a gust of cold air. Mr. Langford cleared his throat awkwardly. I believe we should, perhaps, pause the event for tonight. His voice cracked halfway through the sentence. The mayor, red-faced and fidgeting, stood up. This is unfortunate, he muttered, before hurrying toward the exit, his wife trailing behind. The crowd followed. Some avoided me, some nodded faintly, but most just walked out, like witnesses eager to forget what they'd seen. And through it all, Vanessa stood frozen. When the lights dimmed, she finally spoke, her voice hoarse and brittle. You think you've won, Margaret? I turned slowly. There was never a competition. Her laugh was hollow. You made me look like a thief in front of everyone. I met her eyes. You did that all by yourself. She blinked hard, tears threatening to fall but never quite making it. You have no idea what it's like, she whispered. To work your whole life for a place in this world and then watch someone like you, someone small, tear it away. I know exactly what it's like, I said. I've lived it. I've been laughed at, ignored, and forgotten. But I learned something, Vanessa. The people who chase status always fall harder than those who stand in truth. Her shoulders slumped. For the first time, she looked her age. Not polished, not perfect, just tired. Peter turned away from her, rubbing his forehead. Vanessa, he said quietly, we'll talk later. And then he left, his footsteps echoing across the marble like a final judgment. The room emptied slowly until only a few waiters remained, clearing half-finished glasses. The chandelier light flickered weakly above us. Vanessa stood alone, surrounded by everything she'd ever wanted, money, status, attention, and yet she looked like a woman who'd lost it all. I walked toward her, stopping just a few feet away. You can fix this, I said softly. Not with lies, not with power. With honesty, she didn't answer, just stared at the floor, her reflection blurred in the marble beneath her feet. As I turned to leave, she whispered something so low I almost missed it. You were never supposed to win, I paused, looking back at her one last time. That's the thing, Vanessa, I said quietly. I wasn't playing. And then I walked away, leaving her standing in the glittering ruins of her own kingdom. The ballroom was almost empty now. Only the faint music of the closing band played somewhere in the background, soft and tired, like the night itself was trying to forget what had happened. I stood by the window for a moment, watching the valet lights flicker outside. Cars came and went. People slipped into the dark, carrying their gossip like souvenirs. The smell of champagne and perfume still hung in the air, but the sparkle was gone. What remained was the silence of truth, uncomfortable, heavy, but clean. Ethan approached quietly. He didn't say anything at first. He just stood next to me, staring out at the night. You didn't have to do that, Mom, he said finally. I know, I answered. But I needed to. He nodded, looking down at his hands. I used to think you were too soft, that you let people walk all over you. I smiled faintly. Maybe I did. But softness isn't weakness, Ethan. It's a restraint. It's knowing you could destroy someone and choosing not to. He took a deep breath, his voice breaking slightly. Dad would have been proud of you. I hope so, I whispered. He always said truth doesn't shout, it waits. Tonight, it stopped waiting. We left the hall together, walking past tables littered with empty glasses and wilted flowers. The grandeur of it all seemed smaller now, like a costume stripped off after a bad performance. At the door, I paused and looked back one last time. The chandeliers still glowed, but faintly, like they too were tired of pretending. Vanessa was gone. Her perfume lingered longer than her presence ever would. Outside, the air was cold and real. The kind of air that clears the mind. Ethan offered me his arm. Come on, he said softly. Let's go home. Home, not the big word it used to be, but the truest one. The drive was quiet. The city lights blurred against the windows, glowing like ghosts of everything that didn't matter anymore. When we pulled into my small driveway, the porch light flicked on automatically. The same one Robert had installed years ago. It hummed faintly, steady and familiar. I got out, my heels clicking on the old pavement. The sound felt comforting, real, honest. Inside, the air smelled faintly of lavender and old wood. I slipped off my shoes, ran my fingers across the framed photo of Robert on the hallway table. His smile hadn't changed. Did I do it right? I whispered. The house didn't answer, but it didn't need to. I poured a glass of water, sat by the kitchen window, and looked out into the night. Somewhere out there, Vanessa Price was probably trying to rebuild what truth had quietly taken from her, but that wasn't my burden anymore. I had walked into that ballroom as the woman they mocked, and I walked out as the woman they would never forget. The next morning, sunlight poured through the curtains, soft and gold. The house was quiet, peaceful, the kind of quiet I hadn't felt in years. I made coffee the way Robert used to, 2 sugars, 1 cream, and sat by the kitchen window. For the first time, I wasn't thinking about the past. I was just breathing. Then the phone rang. The screen flashed a name I didn't expect to see. Vanessa Price. For a moment, I just stared at it, listening to the soft buzz of the ringtone. Then I answered. Her voice was thin, fragile. "Margaret," she said, I wanted to apologize. I didn't speak. I let her talk. I was cruel to you," she continued. "And last night, I lost everything. The board asked for my resignation. The papers will have the story by noon." Her voice broke on the last word. "I didn't want this," I said quietly. "I only wanted the truth." "I know," she whispered. "And maybe that's why it hurts so much. You didn't even raise your voice, but you destroyed me." There was silence between us, long, heavy, but strangely human. "I hope you find peace," I said softly. "Not the kind people admire, but the kind that forgives." Vanessa exhaled shakily. "I don't know how." "You'll learn," I said, "the same way I did, after losing everything you thought made you special." She didn't reply. The line went quiet, then clicked off. I set the phone down, the coffee still warm in my hand. Outside, the world looked softer, kinder. Sometimes peace doesn't come from winning. It comes from letting go of the war entirely. A week later, I found an envelope in my mailbox, cream paper, gold seal, the emblem of the foundation embossed at the top. For a moment, I just held it in my hands. Letters from them usually came with requests or updates. This one felt heavier. I sat at the kitchen table, the morning sun spilling across the wood, and opened it carefully. Inside was a single page. "Dear Mrs. Hale, on behalf of the Robert Hale Foundation, we want to thank you once again for your extraordinary generosity. Your donation has not only secured our scholarship program for the next decade, it has inspired others to give as well. Several anonymous benefactors have followed your example, pledging their own contributions. Construction of the new education center will begin next month. The board has voted unanimously to name the main hall after you, the Margaret Hale Hall of Integrity. With deepest respect, the Board of Trustees." I read it twice, then set it down gently. The words blurred for a moment, not from sadness, but from something deeper: peace, integrity. That was all I had ever wanted, to prove that integrity still mattered in a world that worshipped appearances. I walked to the living room and looked at Robert's photograph on the mantel. "We did it," I whispered. "You and I." The house was quiet again, but it wasn't empty anymore. It was full of purpose, of memory, of something I thought I'd lost long ago. I folded the letter neatly and placed it beside his photo. Some legacies are written in marble. Ours was stitched, like my blue dress, patiently, quietly, and with love. It was a quiet Sunday afternoon when I heard a soft knock at the door. No one ever came by unannounced anymore, so for a moment I thought it might be a delivery. But when I opened it, I froze. Vanessa stood there. Gone were the sequins and the gold. She wore a plain gray coat, her hair pulled back, her eyes bare of makeup. For the first time, she looked human, small, almost fragile. "May I come in?" she asked quietly. I hesitated, then stepped aside. She entered slowly, her gaze moving around my modest home, the same one she'd once mocked on a ballroom screen. "It's smaller than I imagined," she said, and then added softly, "But it feels warm." I poured her tea without asking. We sat at the kitchen table in silence for a long while. Finally, she spoke. "They took everything, Margaret. The company, the house, the friends. It's all gone." Her voice cracked. "And I don't even blame them. I did this to myself." I looked at her, not with anger, but with something close to pity. "Maybe losing everything is the only way some people learn what matters." She nodded slowly. "I came to say thank you," she whispered, "for not shouting, for not ruining me with hate. You could have, but you didn't." I smiled faintly. "Hate is heavy, Vanessa. I got tired of carrying it." Her eyes filled, but she didn't cry. She stood, smoothing her coat. "I hope one day I can be as strong as you." "You will," I said, "when strength is your only choice." She gave a small nod, then left quietly. Through the window, I watched her walk down the path alone, lighter than when she'd arrived. The day of the opening ceremony arrived bright and clear. The air was cool, the kind that wakes you up gently and makes everything feel possible. The new education center stood tall on the edge of the city, clean lines, warm brick, sunlight spilling through glass windows. Children's laughter echoed. In the courtyard, bouncing off walls that didn't even exist a year ago. Ethan met me at the entrance, a proud smile on his face. "You ready, Mom?" "As I'll ever be," I said, squeezing his hand. A small crowd had gathered. Teachers, families, board members, reporters. Banners fluttered in the breeze with the foundation's name written in gold. But one sign caught my eye. The Robert and Margaret Hale Education Center. I took a slow breath. My husband's name beside mine. It felt right, not like fame, but like peace. When the ribbon was placed in my hands, I thought of every moment that had brought me here. The laughter at the gala, the humiliation, the strength it took to stand back up. I spoke softly into the microphone. This place isn't just for learning. It's proof that good things grow from hard soil, that dignity can survive mockery, and truth always finds its light. Applause filled the courtyard, not loud or forced, but warm, honest. As I cut the ribbon, children rushed forward, their voices bright and eager. One little girl tugged my sleeve and said, "I want to be like you when I grow up." I knelt, smiling. "Then always be kind," I said. "That's where strength begins." The cameras flashed. Ethan slipped his arm around me, and for the first time since Robert's passing, I felt whole again. That night, after the ceremony, I sat alone on my porch with a cup of tea, watching the sunset bleed into gold and rose. The sky looked like the color of my old dress, the one they laughed at. Funny how things come full circle. The blue gown now hung in my closet again, neatly pressed, the fabric soft under my fingers. Once, it had been a symbol of my shame. Now, it was my armor, a reminder that quiet dignity can speak louder than a room full of applause. Ethan had gone home, promising to visit tomorrow. The air was still, except for the faint hum of crickets and the heartbeat of peace inside me. I thought of Vanessa, of the apology she had whispered, of the look in her eyes when she realized what real grace looked like. Not diamonds, not status, just truth. Robert used to tell me, "One day, the world will see the woman I married." I smiled into the night. Maybe now it finally had. I wasn't the richest woman in that ballroom. I wasn't the youngest or the most admired, but I was something far rarer, unbreakable. And maybe that's the real victory, because respect built on money fades. But respect built on integrity, that lasts long after the lights go out. I took one last sip of tea, placed the cup down, and whispered to myself, "You did it, Margaret. You kept your soul." The stars came out slowly, one by one, like tiny affirmations from above. And in that quiet moment, I realized the truth that had taken me a lifetime to learn. Kindness may be mocked, but it never loses. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Your support helps bring more stories of courage, dignity, and truth to light. Tell me, what would you have done if you were in Margaret's place? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below.